Hi, Charles Cherney here with The Real Deal, episode 18. Today's question is, what does it mean to remove the mortgage contingency from an offer? So the answer to this question is what it means is that the buyer is presenting themselves as a cash buyer, which is to say that their offer is not contingent upon a loan being approved by a lender. And so it makes them essentially, if you will, a buyer without a mortgage. Now, let's talk about this as it plays out in the real world. So, when an offer is presented without a mortgage contingency, the buyer will be, generally speaking, expected to present proof of funds for the full purchase price to demonstrate that they are, in fact, a buyer who can remove the mortgage contingency. So let's imagine that the offer is for $1 million and the buyer is removing the mortgage contingency from the offer. Then the expectation would be that this buyer would present proof of funds for $1 million to support their $1 million offer. And they can do that in a couple different ways. They could possibly have redacted bank statements that support the $1 million in their name in liquid funds outside of retirement accounts, or they could have a letter from a financial wealth management advisor or someone with equivalent status vouchsafing on their behalf for the person making an offer on a property for X dollars without a mortgage contingency and their ability to pay cash. So this is a buyer who has proof of funds. Now, a cash buyer with proof of funds who pays cash is one kind of buyer without a mortgage contingency. Much more common, however, is the buyer who drops the mortgage contingency, has the proof of funds, but still plans to get a loan set up prior to the closing. Now, that's perfectly fine. This buyer, in this example, if it's $1 million purchase and they have proof of funds to support their offer free of a mortgage contingency, can still go ahead and seek to get a loan set up before closing. It's just that they cannot at some point say to the seller, oh, the loan that I wanted to get was not approved by the bank. Therefore, I'm not proceeding in the transaction because I couldn't get the loan I want. In that circumstance, the seller would say, but you made an offer free of a mortgage contingency, so you cannot back out based on the loan not being approved. If that were in fact what you were planning to do, you needed to have a contingency in your offer to protect your right to exit the transaction on that basis. So in this example, someone without a mortgage contingency who's planning to get a loan, if for any reason that loan's not approved, the expectation is that buyer would come to the table with cash to be the cash buyer they presented themselves to be when they removed the mortgage contingency. And then the third type of person that will make an offer without a mortgage contingency is in fact a buyer who does need a loan. They don't have proof of funds for the full purchase price, and they submit either a pre-approval letter or in some instances a pre-commitment letter in which they indicate to the seller, even though I'm removing the mortgage contingency from my offer, I still will be getting a loan. And the letter they submit will make known, the percentage of the purchase price that they're intending to pursue for completion of the purchase. So it's not really a true cash offer in that there's not proof of funds for the full purchase price. And yet the buyer in that instance is possibly still willing to remove the mortgage contingency to make their offer more attractive to the seller by removing the safety net from the sale of the mortgage contingency. So let's say that buyer has an accepted offer and they don't get the loan. They may be looking at risking losing their deposit, which in some instances is 5%. In fact, in most instances is 5% of the purchase price. So, the seller could technically sue the buyer for performance insofar as they're not completing the transaction on the terms and conditions agreed to in the offer, which has, of course, been replaced by the purchase and sale in the Cambridge and Somerville, Massachusetts market. So look, it's a lot to absorb, but the takeaway from the top is an offer without a mortgage contingency is essentially, if you will, a cash offer, since it's not dependent upon a loan. There are three types of people who make offers without mortgage contingencies. The true cash buyer who has the cash and will pay cash. Then there is someone who can prove they have the funds, but plans to get a loan set up before closing, and they do. And if worse comes to worse, they are prepared to pay cash if the loan's not approved. And then the third type is someone who must get a loan, but is still dropping the contingency in an aim to make their offer more appealing to the seller. Sometimes buyers will ask me why the seller cares Why is a mortgage contingency a big deal, and why would a seller perhaps prefer an offer without a mortgage contingency? And the reason that sellers would, in most instances, prefer a cash offer is cash is king. It's one less contingency. It's one less thing to worry about. Imagine if a seller accepts an offer from a buyer with a mortgage contingency, and then for some reason, the mortgage is not approved by the bank or the lender, and the buyer exits the transaction on their mortgage contingency. That means that the seller is back to square one and has to start the process of finding a buyer all over again. And when an offer with the mortgage contingency is accepted, it may be that the mortgage commitment date is still a month out, and that could put it on the doorstep of the closing date itself. And so if a mortgage contingency is in place, it may mean the seller lacks certainty on whether the property will close until very close to the closing date in the future. If a seller accepts an offer without a mortgage contingency, it may be the seller has a greater level of certainty earlier in time that the process will come to completion and the sale will go to closing. So look, there are no guarantees in real estate. Even in transactions without mortgage contingencies, things can come up that can cause the deal to go sideways and fall apart, and the process of selling the home must begin again. That being said, all things being equal, if a seller is sitting on more than one offer and considering offers with mortgage contingencies and without mortgage contingencies, we can appreciate that many sellers may be favorably inclined to consider an offer without a mortgage contingency, as it may, in their mind, reduce risk that something could go wrong and give them greater certainty that the transaction will complete itself and go to closing. It's quite a bit to absorb, but essentially, the question at hand is, what does it mean to remove the mortgage contingency from an offer? For a buyer, it means removing a safety net that allows you to exit the transaction if the loan's not approved. For a seller, it may mean that you're looking at an offer that's going to be more attractive insofar as it's supported by proof of funds or by a buyer's willingness to forego the protection afforded them via a mortgage contingency to exit the transaction later in time. My name is Charles Cherney. I'm a top residential real estate agent serving buyers and sellers in Cambridge and Somerville, Massachusetts. Myself and my business partner, Maggie D, welcome the opportunity to connect with you as you aim to buy the right home or sell for the best price, or simply have your questions answered about the market, your home, and the community. Reach out at any time by text, telephone, or email for more insight into the mortgage contingency and the process of buying and selling. Be in touch. Take care.